You weren't just smashing things together because it would have been cool to see.
Why are you adapting this? Why is this source material?
You know, by default, this choice is out.
Welcome one, welcome all to ScreenRant's Challenge My Goats. My name is Liam Crowley and I am your shepherd through this journey of superlatives as we crown some of the greatest topics in film and television history. Today we are tackling one of the most contentious debates of all time. It's only appropriate for ScreenRant's Challenge My Goats that we tackle the greatest comic book movie of all time. Our expert today is Deputy Editor of Comics and Superheroes at our sister site, CBR. Sean, welcome. And what makes you qualified to declare the greatest comic book movie of all time? Who is your GOAT?
That's a great question. So being the deputy editor of comics and superheroes for a website called Comic Book Resources, CBR, would I think qualify me to discuss this topic. You don't get to this place unless you've kind of analyzed and scrutinized, you know, all the different choices that are available for top comic book film. But also in addition to that, I mean, I grew up loving comics and came into this industry way back in 1999, kids, which to most of you is before they started making, you know, these massive big blockbuster superhero movies outside of like Superman and Batman and things like that. So I've been able to see the evolution of the genre, the construction of these cinematic universes, the different work being done by Marvel, by DC, by some of these other independent studios, and I've been able to sort of pit all of these ones against them to come up with my choice for the greatest comic book movie experience of all time. And to me, it has to be Avengers Infinity War.
Whew. I saw Sean working on this article when we crossed paths in New York City at the Tron Ares Junket.
That's right.
And the conversation we shared briefly about what makes Infinity War the greatest, I think our challenger is going to have an uphill battle to fight. Sean came prepared. Our challenger, it's the creator and founder of ScreenRant's comics division, Mr. Andrew Dyce. Andrew, great to meet you, my friend. What makes you qualified to challenge Sean's pick?
Yes, well, I would say volume, maybe quantity over quality, at least. I've been, reading comics for over 30 years, voraciously been watching, like Sean, been watching superhero movies when, my first comic book movie that I ever saw, I think was The Phantom, to put things into perspective. So I'm still getting over all this newfangled MCU. But yes, I've been a passionate, reader of comics, characters, all different kinds, all different artists, all different writers, right up to the present day, superheroes, independent comics, even some manga. But the same goes for the movies. You know, there's more on offer now than certainly there was when I was younger. But yeah, if you want more of a paper qualification, my English studies and English degree have always proven that I could talk for hours and hours and hours about this stuff and have. So I'm happy to do it for a little bit here, even if it's an uphill battle.
Is your degree in comics specifically?
They didn't have it when I was there. I took a course, but it was about 5 minutes into the course, and I thought I should probably be teaching this actually. So
I like it. I was going to say nowadays you can get a degree in specifically comic book history and comic book movies, honestly, are like a course now at some universities. It's wild because that's how populated the genre has become. Gentlemen, I have so many questions that I want to lay out in the debate section. But first, I need to hear both of your opening statements. I need you to lay the foundation for me. Sean, we will go to you first as our expert today. What makes Avengers Infinity War the greatest comic book movie of all time?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's the one that features everything that we kind of dreamed up as comic book fans. It's crossovers from characters that we have grown to love. It connects all these different corners of what we have come to know as the MCU. We start off in space, we go to Wakanda, we end up on Thanos' home planet, but it does it all in a cohesive package that narratively makes sense because this has been the two-part culmination of this, 18 film run up to that point of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. 3 phases that, loosely established a villain up until this point, took the time to do origin stories for all of these heroes, and then dumped all the toys, onto the floor and let the Russo brothers go crazy with their co-screenwriters. But what impresses me the most is how the creative team overcame the degree of difficulty to put it together into a package where all of this stuff kind of made sense. You weren't just smashing things together because it would have been cool to see. They were all moving a plot forward with big sort of story arcs that were culminating things that had been started in multiple phases. And so watching it come together in a way that I just really didn't think possible, because I never thought a studio would put the time investment into building this universe. I'm still kind of, gobsmacked that a film like this exists.
30 seconds left. Anything else to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's the one where they lose. And I think that that's pretty significant. I think that it holds an extra weight because of that reason. And what's funny is that I actually think that Endgame is my favorite of the two, but because of the back half and all the crazy stuff that happens in it. But of the two, Infinity War is the better overall movie. And so I had to pick it when it came down to choosing the GOAT.
All right, there's your 2 minutes. Perfectly balanced as all things should be. Sean, hell of an opening statement. I have some questions for you when we get to the debate section. Andrew, first, I need to hear your initial opening statement, which is effectively your rebuttal. Why is Infinity War not the greatest comic book movie of all time?
I will concede that Avengers Infinity War is a historic film, both in terms of marketing, publishing, casting, bringing a cinematic universe together, and it is unquestionably a superhero high point. My issue is when I list out all of the things that I love most about Avengers Infinity War, I cannot help but realize that most of them have almost nothing to do with comics, specifically with the comics that things were based upon. I could run down a list and say that, Chris Evans, I love him as the character, but when I pick up a Captain America comic, it's never him that I'm picturing as Steve. I love Star-Lord and I love the Guardians of the Galaxy, but that's primarily because I love Chris Pratt and I love science fiction. It's not because that's capturing the same things that I connect to in the comics, which again, this is all supposed to be based on, or at least adapted from. And I will hand it that out of all of the MCU movies, I recall feeling watching Avengers Infinity War that this feels the closest. This feels like there are comic book lovers at the helm of this. But by that point, the MCU was so big. The ultimate masters that it was serving were not any adherents to the comic books that came from, they might love the creators of those original stories, but ultimately the master they were serving was the cast chemistry, big screen spectacle, delivering massive action set pieces that would really justify the scale of the movie. So when I think of what a comic book movie is and what a comic book movie should embrace as its main goals and main initiatives, it isn't just that there are people in superhero costumes in there. It is that first and foremost, it's a comic book movie. And I don't think Infinity War really is one.
That's your opening statement. Andrew, I must know, what is your challenger pick?
My challenger pick, I know I have a reputation, so there might be people assuming things, but the answer is actually one word, and that word is a number, and the number is 300. The film directed by Zack Snyder, adapted from the comic by Frank Miller and Lynn Varley.
I thought you were going to pull a bait and switch on me because Andrew today, he sent me a GIF of 300, and I was like, okay, that's an interesting pick. But Alex Ledbeater, our content manager here at ScreenRant, said he's going to pick Batman v Superman. And I was like, I see the posters behind you. I know that Zack Snyder directed both. I'm like, are you pulling my leg right now? I'm going to pull a bait and switch. The stage is set, though. It's Infinity War versus 300, and there's a very good question at hand of what is a better comic book movie. Is it a one-to-one adaptation of a comic, or is it taking inspiration from the source material and give it that feature film flavor? Sean, we'll throw it back to you. Andrew laid up some good points about Avengers Infinity War is a hell of a film, But is it a comic leaping off the page? Tell me why it is.
Oh, it absolutely is. I mean, they're live action adaptations of these characters that we have grown to know over the course of the books. Now, whether they fit your personal interpretation of, what these characters are supposed to be, that comes down to the audience. And you're never going to reach a conclusion where someone is agreeing what is the best interpretation. I can only bring up an interpretation of Superman that I know Andrew holds very dear, and whether people believe that, Henry Cavill versus David Cornsweet versus Christopher Reeve, if you want to go down that route. So I don't think that that's fair necessarily. Like, that's not on the film itself and more on the reader. When you talk about an interpretation or an adaptation of Infinity War from the comics, I'll go Andrew's route and I'll say from the comics. You have to come up with Thanos wanting to collect the Infinity Stones in order to snap with the Gauntlet to eliminate half of the population of the universe, which again, just in itself as a concept would be, okay, great. How are you going to try to tell that story? And the fact that Infinity War, while leaving out major characters, death being one of them, of course, you have to slice some of the stuff out of the Jim Starlin story if you're going to really translate it as the 19th movie in an experimentation that's led us up to this point. But for the things that it had to get right, and I'm going to lean on Thanos primarily and his soldiers that worked for him as part of his team. These are things I never dreamed that I would see on screen before. They're elements pulled right from the inspiration in these comic books. Are they, letter for letter, word for word, picture for picture perfect? They're not, of course, but I think they fit snugly in what the live action adaptation of the MCU was up to this point, while also satisfying a lot of the people who grew up reading these books in the 70s and 80s and would be amazed to say, yes, there's a movie that exists where Thanos actually snaps his fingers and eliminates half of the universe's population.
I'll echo what Andrew said earlier, which is and I'll double it too. Andrew said, you can't, dismiss the achievement that is Infinity War. To me, it is the greatest cinematic achievement of all time. 11 years culminating into this movie, or 10 years for Infinity War, 11 years for Endgame. So many different personalities and actors to manage. I have that framed the first 10 years Marvel class photo, as I like to say, in my bedroom, because I'm just like, how the heck do all these people, all these personalities get together in this movie, seemingly have equal screen time, seemingly have equal storylines, and for it to still be an entertaining watch and a cohesive movie? It's an absolute miracle of a film. Andrew, you're going with 300. Tell me why, specifically on your topic of it being a comic leapt to the screen, why 300 achieves that better than Infinity War.
So I'll start by saying that I think that what you said there, Infinity War, is a massive accomplishment just cinematically. I think it is the absolute culmination and zenith of a type of comic book movie adaptation, which is, it started with Superman, it started with Batman, Christopher Reeve, Michael Keaton. It was a question of looking at comics and saying, how can we film this? How can we make a version of this that is actually a movie? When it gets heightened a little bit and the scale gets lifted up with Sam Raimi, where the special effects are, and Batman Begins, thankfully comes along and says, well, how about we actually reimagine this for what we can film so that it doesn't look weird? And that's a great decision that was made. But that became the norm. I think even if you look at how Steve Rogers is depicted in Avengers versus Infinity War, it's undeniable that the march there was, as a comic book fan, I will say it frustrates me that I think the questions were, how do we make this a little less silly? How do we make this a little bit more grown up? How do we make this a little bit more mainstream, a little bit more, less weird, less comic booky, if I'm being totally honest. We're coming off of James Gunn's Superman, where so many people said it feels like a comic book. And I was upset that seems like a strange thing. Where 300 stands apart is it was the first time where Zack Snyder came along and said, well, they've got the pictures and they've got the words, so I want to make this into a movie. And Warner Brothers famously said, well, we just did Troy. Which is hilarious now. And he said, no, I want to make this the movie. I just want to film this, which I think if you asked a person for their definition of a comic book movie, the answer they're going to give you is going to be embodied by 300 more than almost any film.
This is where I'm at a crossroads right now, because my stubbornness is going Infinity War over 300, but you're making really good points, Andrew. This echoes my perception of what is the greatest Batman movie of all time. I think The Dark Knight is a better film, but I think The Batman, Robert Pattinson's Batman, is that one-to-one Batman leapt off the page, the Gotham City I know from graphic novels put to the big screen. And Infinity War, I see the parallels on the page of stories that I've read that tie into it. I see swapping in the Hulk for Silver Surfer, warning that Thanos is coming. I see Thanos turning, I think it's Mantis to the way that she falls out with the reality stone, right? Sean, you can correct me.
And Drax, I believe, too. Yeah. Where they kind of changes them into...
Drax with the blocks, too.
Alters them. Yeah. Terrifying.
Yeah, with reality can be whatever I want. I see those panels coming to life. But as a full story, I think Andrew makes some really solid points about the nature of how the story flows for modern feature film audiences. Sean, what I want you to tell me right now, those individual panel moments that are leaping from the comic to the big screen, tell me what those are for you in Infinity War, and why does that elevate Infinity War to be the greatest comic book movie of all time?
Well, in a way, if you ask that question, it makes Andrew's point, and the fact that there aren't direct panels that you could pull out of Infinity War and say that, look, they're being brought to life. Because Zack Snyder really does appreciate his source material and tries to replicate it, almost to the point where some would argue he's a great mimicker, and in his work will bring these already existing illustrations and storylines, whether it be Watchmen, whether it be 300, or of course when he tries to do The Dark Knight Returns, with drastic changes. The point I'd rather make, Liam, and I know where you're going with the discussion, is that whether this is true or not, I think when more people think about the term comic book movie, if you asked most of the mainstream audience, is 300 based on a comic book, better than half are going to tell you they don't think it is. And they'd be wrong, but I'm saying that the perception of what is a comic book movie is where we're going to get into. Like, Andrew's taking the very literal interpretation. He is correct. 300 source material is absolutely a comic book movie. But I think the definition of what is a comic book movie, and it almost speaks to the way that Zack treats comic books as a genre. He's more interested in the books that think outside the box and go outside of the boundaries and push the limitations, which is why he adapts source material into things like Watchmen, into things like 300. And when he does have to get down to the level and play with the capes that we love in our superhero films, you get more philosophical films like Man of Steel or Batman versus Superman, especially the extended cut. However, I'm not buying into the fact that this is the traditional comic book movie in a debate about what is the best of the genre. I think that that's too much of a left field choice to be like, okay, well, technically, yes, 300 is a comic book, but I don't think I'm not going to say it doesn't qualify, because it definitely qualifies as a comic book movie. But like, to me, I want to see tights. I want to see capes. I want to see superheroes. I want to see the Marvel and DC folks that we grew up on loving. Is 300 a comic book movie? Yeah, sure, it is, but not really. Not if we're having this conversation. I'm going to argue that it isn't. And so I think Andrew's kind of, by default, his choice is out.
I hear what you're saying. Because 300, I love when history is used in my comic book movies. I love X-Men First Class tackling the Cuban Missile Crisis. Most of the X-Men movies have real life history involved in them, and I think it's a great side plot or framework to build the story around. 300 here, the whole story is history at the forefront, as opposed to, obviously it's an interpretation of what's on the page, but I would argue, like Sean is saying, that most people, when they think of 300, they think about the history element and less about the comic book element. Andrew, your pick is, I don't want to say a technicality at this point, but it's being argued to be.
It is.
Tell me why it's not a technicality pick, or if you're going to embrace it being a technicality pick, why does that make it extra special?
I think that for me, it comes down to what is the artistic goal of the people. Why are you adapting this? Why is this source material? For me, it feels like typically, when the adaptation is pretty clear at this point, you take a comic, you break out the elements, and then you see how a story can be blocked out sequentially. Who are the characters? What are the big scenes and the moments? That's all those ones I talked about. But for me, it is fundamentally, and I always do this myself when I say, ooh, this comic could make a great movie. I'm actually thinking this has all the components and elements that could be lifted out and then placed into the outline of a film that's a blockbuster movie, limited by budget and all of those things. So we're basically saying this comic book can fit into a movie's skeleton. For me, it is just as valid for a film creator to say, well, what is this comic expanded out using the conventions of cinema that people are going to recognize with? We're going to get the story. When there's narration, who's going to do that speaking? Let's go get David Wenham and deliver an instantly iconic narration for the story. What are the elements that we need to adapt this into a film? And I will say, it doesn't need to be one of the few that would make up this list of films that have been, said, well, I'm not going to change the style because that's what's great about the comic. I'm not going to change the color scheme. That's what's great about the comic. All I need to do is take this and adapt it to a new medium. The fact that more people have never tried that, I think it works against, it may be the only technical one that hits the perfect definition of comic book movie. But I'd say that's one of the things that makes it more of the great standout, deserving of GOAT status than, say, 1 of 15 and it just happens to be the most successful of them.
Andrew, there's a lot of passion behind your argument, and this is the time where I would like to check in on the nostalgia for both of you. These are both really good films. I think this is universally agreed upon. This is more for when there's an out there pick where I'm like, are you biased because of the context in which you saw this film or TV show? And I always like to check. Sean, Avengers: Infinity War. We all remember where we were. Where were you when you first saw this movie? And tell me about your emotions the first time you left the theater.
So I saw it at a press screening, and that's not the best audience for it, right? Like, I had a more memorable time.
I can't believe people saw these movies at press screenings. Like, this is before I got in the industry. I'm like, well, if you saw that thing early, how early?
The Tuesday the week it opened. So, and I think by the time it opened, it probably opened like Wednesday night. They'd moved it up. So not incredibly early, but early enough, that we were able to kind of process it. But I knew I was going back opening weekend anyway. And I had a much better experience with that because you're seeing it with the fans reacting to all of that. But even, in the jaded, cynical audience of film critics, there was shock and awe, of what we were witnessing and what they were able to pull off. And I think that I'm always going to remember that. Liam, you probably remember this as well, too. And then Andrew, I'm sure you do. Like the build up to even the release of Infinity War. Now, this is the marketing machine. I understand this. But like every little bit of footage we had, was just adding to the anticipation of what is this film going to be. And that's when Marvel was humming, on all cylinders. The machine, the marketing machine was firing, everything that they had at us. And we were eating it up hook, line, and sinker. So, there is a bit of nostalgia that weighs into because as a cinema going, theatrical experience, it's going to be tough to top Infinity War. I more want Andrew to discuss the fact that 300 is probably the third best comic book adaptation on Zack Snyder's own filmography. How can we call something the GOAT when it's not even the best thing that the director himself has done in the medium? That seems difficult. Watchmen is above it. Batman versus Superman Ultimate Cut is above it. Then maybe 300. I mean, you probably should have gone with one of those two if we're going to get into the literal interpretations.
Okay, Sean with some firepower. I will say the Infinity War marketing campaign, unlike anything else, I remember when the Comic-Con trailer leaked. Yeah, I watched some leaked footage back in summer 2017, and they included, in hindsight, in that first trailer, Spidey getting dusted and Star-Lord getting dusted. They just didn't show the effect happening. So Spidey goes, oh, I'm sorry. And Star-Lord goes, oh man. And then you see in the film, you're like, oh my God, they showed us that scene back in that trailer that I watched on Grady's cell phone footage before it was scrubbed from the internet forever. Insane. It's still one of the greatest trailers of all time, and they never officially released that version. I don't want to distract from the question that Sean just posed to Andrew. I still want to get Andrew's nostalgia check. I want to know when you first screened 300 and what your emotions were like with it. But also, you got some defending to do, man. He just called out your boy. He just said Zack Snyder's got 2 films that are better than this.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't want you to take that.
I'll take Sean's point, that the challenger for his GOAT is Batman v Superman all day long. But I will say that forget the movie. I remember when the first trailer for 300 played in the theater and that 9 Inch Nails song came on, and it was the sunlit guys coming off the cliff. And I remember sitting there in the theater, like probably a lot of people do, thinking, what am I looking at? Like, is this a movie? I didn't know movies could look like this. I didn't know movies could have, we know it's speed ramping now. We have a word for it. But at the time, it was that this is Sparta and the kick slowing down and all of the fabric flowing. I'm sitting there going, I did not know a movie could look like this. And then I got to look at the comic and said, oh, that makes sense. This is the visual style of the comic adapted to film. So when the movie came out, I remember just sitting in the theater thinking, I was with my dad, which was terrific, except for the sex scenes. But I was sitting there thinking, well, this is just some of the coolest stuff I've ever seen. This is the guys coming down, marching to the hard rock. I will say the parts of the movie that I love the most ended up being wholly Snyder's addition to it. It ended up being sort of filling in the moments that film would really, really contribute to, especially with his visual effects team. But really, I would say that out of Zack Snyder's films, I think 300 is the one that I would say fits most comfortably into the classification of a comic book movie. One of the reasons I love, Batman v Superman is because it breaks those bonds so much. And one of the reasons why I adore Watchmen, but one of the reasons why I'm not as hot on it is like Sean's saying, it isn't quite what I go to when I think of a comic book story.
Interesting. Very well argued points. Sean, something I want to ask you before we get into our closing statements. I don't want to distract from the topic of this debate too much, but Andrew brings up a really good point about Zack Snyder's unique visual approach and the uniqueness that Zack Snyder is able to bring to his films. No one makes a film like Zack Snyder. You could argue, and I would not be this guy, I love the Russo brothers. I think they have made 4 of the top 5 Marvel movies in existence. However, some could argue they're system quarterbacks. They fit the Marvel machine better than anyone, and they are the best at bringing the Feige's and the Marvel machine's vision to live action realization. I don't want to do a Zack Snyder versus Russo brothers here, but I want to get your take on the Russo brothers' direction of Infinity War and why their style specifically elevates it to this GOAT status.
Oh yeah, if it were the Russos versus Zack Snyder, I would lose that debate. Like it's not happening. To that end, I think the MVPs of Infinity War are not Joe and Anthony Russo, and this is why I'm marginally concerned about where we're heading with Doomsday. I think it's Marcus and McFeely. I think it's the screenwriters. I think it's the team that sat down to plot out these, what we now know as extremely memorable, crowd-pleasing moments that narratively, I can't go back to this enough, that narratively made sense. Like when I bring up, Thor arriving in Wakanda, or Captain America, who is on the lam because of Civil War, emerging from the shadows because the battle has pulled him into it. These moments that still give me goosebumps when I'm watching them on a TikTok feed years later. It's because we had this buy-in and this investment to these characters. And that to me goes back to writing. Now, that's not to say that without throwing certain names under the bus, there are certain directors who have stepped into the Marvel machinery and not been as successful. They don't have a visual flair. And there have been plenty of directors who have stepped in who are very talented filmmakers who don't make it sing for whatever reason. So yes, a lot of times all those boxes have to be checked. But I don't come out of Infinity War, although there are some really beautiful shots in it. And I think going from the tone of the cosmic to the urban, to even going into the celestial, there are visual elements where I'm like, oh yeah, that's a really cool shot. But I don't turn Infinity War on because I want to test out my 4K TV and really drink in the visuals of something of it. I go into it because I want to go on that ride. And that ride I attribute to screenwriting, and I attribute to the performances of the actors in these characters, who I could go 20 deep naming the names of characters. Whereas with 300, I know Gerard Butler's in it, but I don't think I could tell you the names of 2 characters from it. So
I will say, back in the day when cable TV was more of a thing, when I was flipping through the channels, if FX had on Avengers Infinity War, I am sitting down to finish that movie every single time. Every time. It is an addiction. I don't care at what point we're in the story. I'm ready. I don't need to rewind. I'm ready to just go. And I love that. I love that you brought that up. Gentlemen, that will conclude our debate section. Closing statement time. This has been a very well-researched debate here, and I never thought I'd see 300 versus the Infinity War, and I never thought I'd feel like it's so even, but you both bring very good points to the stage that I feel like is only a matter of subjectivity as to whether you disagree with those points or not. Andrew, I'll give you 60 seconds to wrap this thing up. What makes 300 the greatest comic book movie of all time?
300 is my GOAT, as the greatest of all time, because I think it's also the most comic book movie of all time. It's the purest comic book movie of all time. It is the proudest comic book movie of all time. When you have a director cutting squares out of the book and putting them into the storyboards, the comic book in which a movie exists first and decides that at that level we need to be faithful to the source material and then expand from it. That's in a class of its own. There's an Italian proverb, Liam, that says translation is a traitor. And I think that's evident in a lot of movies, and it is not in 300. It stands in a class of its own. I'd say that's a strength. I have a lot of respect for Marvel. I have a lot of respect for the Avengers, but I think as the studio did when they decided to remove the comic book pages, flipping at the beginning and replace them with their film characters, they've become their own thing at this point, which means the comic book movie of all time, it remains 300.
Sean, you got any proverbs for me for your closing statement? You got 60 seconds to tell me why Infinity War is the greatest of all time.
I wish I did, honestly. I'll go with just "Nuff Said" by Stan Lee. So I'm leaning into Avengers Infinity War as the GOAT of the comic book genre simply because it's more entertaining. It's a movie, like Liam kind of pointed out himself, that no matter where you land on it, you're going to finish it till the end of the film. It is, I don't want to even play the box office card, but if you want to go, before you hit the comments down below, go look at the box office and see how Infinity War did versus 300. But not that matters against quality. It's not. It's just McDonald's is really popular as well too. I understand that. I want to emphasize again the degree of difficulty in pulling off a movie like Infinity War, because as Andrew has pointed out multiple times, the frames were there for Zack to replicate. If Zack needed to know what a shot should look like, he could go reference the graphic novel and then replicate it, and would do an excellent job of visualizing it in the camera/computer that Zack uses to put his films together. The Russos and the writers had to actually construct this universe from the seeds of what were there already. And I think they did a masterful job of setting up not just this film, but its conclusion and the end of the Infinity Saga.
I gave Sean a little extra time there because he brought up box office in a debate against Zack Snyder. I was like, ooh, I was waiting for that point all debate, and to get it at the last second.
Well, can I
it's
just
going to be contentious in the comments if...
Can I add real briefly, Liam, that I did all my research as if Dyce was going to choose Batman versus Superman. So from the get-go, he had me with a left punch that I was like, oh, everything I prepared is out the window. Yeah, great. All my points, all my talking points are shot.
Jeez, I remember Batman v Superman opening weekend and just leaving that theater being like, I don't know how I feel. And I was 15 years old. I should have been like, oh my God, look at these superheroes. This is great. And I left being like, Jesse Eisenberg was the Riddler.
It led you here, Liam.
Yeah, here we are. I remember when those posters came out behind you. Oh my God, they were the coolest thing ever. When they were on all the subway stations, it was nuts.
Yeah, but that's not his choice.
I don't want to talk so much about Batman v Superman.
That's not his choice.
Yeah, that's a dangerous road to head down. Yeah.
300 versus Infinity War. Yeah, I only got so many hours in the day. Don't want to spend too much time starting some Batman v Superman discourse. I save that for the weekends. That's when I actually have free time. If you on ScreenRant.com disagree with our GOAT selections, you got to let us know down in the comments below, because there are dozens, nay hundreds of comic book movies out there that could be argued for this GOAT selection. I myself, I think I would go with the Batman for the sake of what I was saying briefly earlier, where it feels like a graphic novel brought to life, and I love the story, and baby, it's October right now, so I'm going to watch it about 45 times before this month is over, so maybe I'll pop in on the Batman debate when we eventually get to that one. That one will be a fun one, but still, go in the comments section, let us know what your selections are, and give us some reasons why. And if you give a well-argued argument, we're going to read it on the show next week. This is the time where we typically read the comments of our previous week's episode, but a little peek behind the curtain, we're pre-recording this episode because New York Comic Con's on the horizon, and all of us are about to be very, very busy covering all the superhero news that's going down in the Javits Center that weekend in October. So instead of filling this time with our comments section, Sean and Andrew, I'd love to know, for your Comic-Con memories, whether they be New York or San Diego, whether you were at the convention hall or covering the convention remotely, what's a core memory that sticks out to you? Andrew, we'll start with you.
Oh man, it has to be sitting in a room with the greatest Batman creators, of all time: Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams, Frank Miller, Scott Snyder. Run down the list, all in a panel together, and it was a healing moment for me, because a young girl got up to the microphone and said, "I want to ask, which do you think is the best version of Batman?" And the oohs in the crowd expected the roof to blow up. And then Denny O'Neil leaned forward to the microphone and said, "Whichever one you like best." And the gasp from the room as everybody realized why we're all there. That I think of often whenever I need to kind of get a reality check.
Oh my God, chills.
Yeah.
Literal chills.
Yeah,
that I felt something in my body right there. Oh my God, hell of a moment. Sean, what's your greatest Comic-Con memory?
I'm going to go to the panel for Star Wars The Force Awakens at San Diego Comic-Con. It was Hall H. It ended with them bringing the entire cast out, which included Carrie Fisher, Mark Hamill, and Harrison Ford. And then at the end of the panel, J.J. Abrams invited everyone in the hall to march in a line behind the San Diego Convention Center and head over to the park that's behind the giant convention center for and everybody, as they walked, and everyone stayed in an orderly fashion, followed essentially the Star Wars Force Awakens cast to this park, where as we were walking in, everyone was handed a plastic lightsaber that lit up. And then we sat and watched the San Diego Symphony Orchestra conduct music from Star Wars, and waved our lightsabers with hundreds of fans, and just, basked in the only thing that could have made it marginally better is if John Williams were there to conduct the orchestra. He was not, but it was an amazing memory that I will always cherish. And you might have heard about this because the panel that was after The Force Awakens was poor Kevin Smith, and he jokes often about how he played to maybe 35 people because they cleared out Hall H for the Force Awakens panel. I was there. I was part of it. It was incredible. And I'll never forget that.
I remember seeing the social videos of that moment, and all the lightsabers in the sky as the sun was setting, and they were playing the Force theme. I'm going to start welling up out here. My God, what a moment. I thank you guys for sharing those memories. This is like why we do what we do. And like you just said, Andrew, sometimes we need that reality check, and hearing those two stories, so beautiful. Mine, it's a recency bias pick. I've only ever been to New York Comic Con the past 4 years, but seeing the Percy Jackson and the Olympian season 1 trailer with a packed Empire stage crowd, which is the Hall H of New York Comic Con, and hearing those cheers. And it was during the actors strike, so none of the actors were there, but the creators and costume designers and cinematographers were all on stage. So like the creatives who actually make, like, obviously we love the actors and the people who bring this to life, but the people who give the technical stuff, I know all of us have given a million interviews over the years. The people behind the scenes tell the most in-depth and detailed stories because they're the ones who are actually puppet mastering the whole project. Yep. And so to get to hear them speak and them to be spotlit in such a great atmosphere like that, truly, truly special. And I hope it's the first of many Empire Stage memories to come at New York Comic Con. I hope we get some more Empire Stage memories at New York Comic Con this upcoming weekend, time of recording. Anyways, that's our spiel about our Comic Con love. Guys, before we get out of here, Andrew, we'll go to you first. Where can the people find you, and what do you have coming up at ScreenRant.com?
Yes, you can find me and my team covering all the latest in comic book news at ScreenRant. And then you can find me rambling into a microphone about this very film right here for what has to be dozens of hours, making far worse points than I have today, probably. But that is there for you to enjoy. Like Liam, if you decide, I don't have anything to do this weekend, I can just do this. Then,
well, wait, what's the name of the podcast? You got to give the name.
Oh, I'm sorry. Batman v Superman by the minute.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sean. Plug. 1 minute at a time. I think we're at 100+ hours we've discussed now. So
I love that. Maybe one of these days, if I can find time in my schedule, any excuse to give a rewatch to old Batman v Superman. I still listen to the score just about every single day. There's a couple tracks on there that are in my rotation. I can't remember the exact names, but I'll have to go back and check my playlist.
You can feel them
over to you.
You can feel them.
Yeah, I have it in my memory. Sean, before we get out of here, where can the people find you, and what do you have going on over at CBR?
So I'm at CBR. I don't do as much writing as I used to, but I'm guiding the editorial stuff for the comics and superhero section. Love the team over there. We've got some incredibly insightful coverage of Peacemaker Season 2 that has been happening, and some really good pieces on Marvel Zombies, which is better than people probably assume that it is. But I think viewership has been pretty good on it. But more people need to check out Zombies because it was really good and had a good cliffhanger ending. We're going to be gearing up for Lanterns, which is going to be a huge one for DC, and covering a lot of stuff about Man of Tomorrow. And there's a chance that over at CBR, I don't want to promise anything, but we're cooking up the launch of a podcast that is going to be dedicated to a lot of comics and superheroes content that might pull me back into the podcast game after retiring after several years on the circuit. So we'll see. Keep your eyes peeled and your ears peeled for a potential new podcast project at CBR. The tease, kids. We call that a tease.
Any excuse to get Sean O'Connell back on a microphone on a regular basis, I will be there. I will be there to hear him say, welcome. I snuck that in at the beginning. I don't know if you picked up on that. That was my little tip of the cap to yesteryear.
Thank you, sir.
Anyways, over in Liam Crowley land at ScreenRant, there's a million interviews going on right now because we are in the beginning stages of Oscar season. Every movie that is coming out, every actor we're talking to seems to be gearing up for some sort of award. I have interviews going live on the site for films like A House of Dynamite with Idris Elba, Anemone with director Ronan Day Lewis, Tron Ares, not exactly an Oscars movie, but still a movie I enjoyed very, very much. What else do I have coming up? Springsteen. Oh my God. Springsteen is phenomenal. I can say that. The embargo was lifted. I did not realize how much that film hit me until like a couple days later, on a personal, spiritual level. Bruce Springsteen, I was like never the biggest fan growing up because I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts. He wasn't exactly like part of the zeitgeist. Now I'm like, damn, Nebraska is kind of my jam right now. So Jeremy Allen White, director Scott Cooper, and Odessa Young. If you don't know the name, you'll definitely know her name after this film comes out. All those will be live on ScreenRant.com. And then always stay tapped to my socials at Liam T. Crowley, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, where I like to share some of the clips on my story pretty regularly. Very proud of the content we have coming out, and it obviously takes a village with the ScreenRant team. So shout outs to Graham, Tatiana, Rob, Grant, all these great people who make these things come together. I'm just the avatar at the end of the day. I go in the junket room, I read some questions, I come up with most of them, but it's on the backs of a lot of hardworking people. So wanting to make sure they get their flowers. Next week, if things go according to plan, we're going to be getting deep into the spooky season. We'll be tackling the best horror actor of all time. I need to do some thinking on this one because there's a couple names that circulate, but I want to know who has that repeat value of beyond just being in one movie, because there's a couple standouts, but still, it's going to be one to think about. We'll come ready with our selections next week. Thank you all for joining us. Until next time,